Today we will discuss wide and voidable agreements in works contracts. We know that every promise and every set of promises forming the consideration for each other is an agreement. That is, promise is also there and consideration is also there. And we also understand that agreement must be legally valid for qualifying as a contract. But the agreement may be a valid agreement, void agreement, or voidable agreement. Let us understand what is void agreement. An agreement not enforceable by law is said to be void. Therefore, void agreement has no legal value. Let us understand with some examples. Agreement in restraint of trade is void, generally not taken up in works contracts. Agreement without consideration is void, and in most of the works contracts or agreements there is a consideration. Agreement in restraint of legal proceedings is void. This is also generally avoided in works contracts. Agreement to do impossible act is also void, and in works contract we define the work, so this is also not normally applicable. Agreement also becomes void for uncertainties. This may be the case sometimes. Suppose there is an agreement for the sale of cement or equipment with a stipulation that the price, dates of payment, and manner of delivery shall be agreed upon from time to time. The agreement is void, and it is void due to uncertainty because we are deciding the conditions to agree in future. An agreement is made for supply of say 500 air conditioners or 500 bags of cement, whatever it is. Suppose for 500 air conditioners and each at the rate of rupees 30,000 or 40,000. So it is not written whether it is 30,000 or 40,000, but this is written in the agreement say 30,000 or 40,000. So there is an uncertainty in the rate. Therefore, this agreement is void. And we also know that an agreement enforceable by law only becomes a contract. Therefore, for a valid contract, an agreement must be valid and it should not be void. An agreement which is not voidable provided both parties decide to honor it, otherwise it becomes voidable. Sometimes agreement becomes voidable, and therefore a contract being a legal document, we must understand that our agreement neither it is void nor voidable. Let us discuss what is voidable agreement. An agreement which is enforceable by law at the option of one or more of the parties. Suppose there is only the contractor and the employer, so there are only two parties. But suppose this is enforceable at the option of say employer or the contractor. Then suppose contractor does not want to enforce it, then it is voidable, or employer doesn't want to enforce it, that is also voidable. And suppose both the parties take an option to enforce it, then it is not voidable. So but not at the option of the other or others, it is a voidable agreement. So a voidable contract or agreement is a formal agreement between the parties that may not be legally enforceable. uh, it becomes because suppose one or both parties have not disclosed a material fact. The contract includes misrepresentation, errors, or fraudulent statements. The contract was signed under duress or undue influence. one or both parties could not legally enter into a contract. The contract conditions one or more unconscionable terms it has. Breach of contract occurs. Still, a contract with one or more of these issues can still be considered legally enforceable if both parties decide to honor its terms anyway. So, with this, all agreements are contracts if they are made by the free consent of parties, and these parties are competent to contract, and that is done for a lawful consideration and with a lawful object, and these are not hereby expressly declared to be void, then it becomes contract. If we talk about free consent, then free consent is means that when it is not caused by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake subject to certain provisions. Normally, in works contracts, condition of coercion or undue influence do not come so easily. But there may be conditions, there may be case sometimes of fraud or misrepresentation, and also of mistake. We will discuss about the mistake. Mistake may be mistake of law or mistake of fact. Mistake, suppose either party says that they were not aware of the law, then Indian Contract Act says that no party shall be allowed to claim any relief on the grounds of ignorance of Indian law. Therefore, this becomes voidable. Then let us talk about the mistake of fact. Mistake of fact means this is when both the parties misunderstand each other, leaving them at a crossroads. Such a mistake can be because of an error in understanding, or ignorance, or omission, etc. But a mistake is never intentional. It is an innocent overlooking. These mistakes can either be unilateral or bilateral. Bilateral means when both parties of a contract are under a mistake of fact essential to the agreement. Such a mistake is a bilateral mistake. Here, both the parties have not consented to the same thing in the same sense, which is the definition of consent. Since there is an absence of consent altogether, the agreement is void. However, to render an agreement void, the mistake of fact should be about some essential fact, that is, of importance in a contract. So, if the mistake is about the existence of the subject matter or its title, quality, quantity, price, etc., then it would be a void contract. But if the mistake is of something inconsequential, then the agreement is not void and the contract will remain in place. For example, suppose one party agrees to get a building dismantled from another party, but at the time of the agreement, the building collapses or it has already collapsed, then neither the employer nor the contractor were aware of this, and so there is no contract at all, and so the contract is void due to mistake of fact. Let us discuss unilateral mistake. It means this is when only one party to the contract is under a mistake. In such a case, the contract will not be void. So the Act says in such condition state that just because one party was under a mistake of fact, the contract will not be void or voidable. So if only one party has made a mistake of fact, the contract will remain valid contract. And after the discussion of various types of the agreements and then contract, we can say that the contract is a legal document. It is to be ensured that neither it is void or nor voidable. All contracts are legally enforceable, but all agreements may not be. Thanks for attending. I am KM Soni, retired ADG CPWD. Thanks a lot.